In North Dakota, we don't have quite as many trees as some of our sister states like Minnesota, although good wind like Minnesota's we were discussing yesterday, but fewer trees than many other states. But we do have the national grasslands. And I'm not sure how in the course of history the Forest Service ended up with the grasslands rather than perhaps some other division of USDA. But there's some unique challenges in managing the grasslands. As you know, we have ranchers out there, and certainly that creates, I think, a different situation for you than you would face in terms of managing forests. One of the questions I have for you is clearly you manage for multiple uses, but the ranchers feel that when there is a dispute with Forest Service, that they'd like to be able to go to ag mediation. Our farmers and ranchers are used to going to ag mediation services, and they feel that that would be a good way to have arbitration or dispute resolution and management with the Forest Service. They feel that would be a fair venue. Please give me your thoughts on using the ag mediation service for that process.
Well, Senator, our decisions on the grasslands are covered by our appeals process. And if we're making a decision that results in a suspension or a cancellation, a reduction in the number of cattle that's being grazed, then we do use the mediation procedures. But if our decisions are not of that level of significance, then we go through our appeals process, and that's available to the ranchers. And so on the more significant decisions, definitely we go through mediation before we move forward. Decisions, then we use our appeals process that's available for the ranchers if they disagree with the decision.
So you say you are going through North Dakota Ag Mediation Services for some of the decisions?
Yes, if it's a decision that results in a suspension or a reduction in the number of cattle that's being grazed, we do go through a mediation.
I think the concern that and from the rancher's standpoint, they're out there, they live there, they work there, they're making a living there, they recognize multiple use, they're good stewards of the land. Their concern is if they go through your internal process, how is that in essence an arbitration or a fair hearing process where both sides are have the same relative standing. And so that's their concern with going through a mediation service rather than through an internal service of the Forest Service. And the other thing is, since USDA has a national appeals division, why not use the national appeals division that everyone else throughout USDA uses? That would certainly provide a fair venue and a venue, again, where you have both parties feeling like they're getting fair treatment. What about that approach? Well,
Senator, I feel our current approach is the mix of the two processes, in that there's been a lot of support for our appeals process from everyone that we deal with, because I think it's proven to be a fair process. If a decision's made by the Grassland supervisor, his decision is appealed then to the regional office, so it's a different set of people that look at it. And so I feel that our appeal process is very fair. But when we are talking about a more significant decision, such that it was, it have an effect on the ranchers' operations as far as reducing the number of livestock they can run, then we do use the mediation process. We also, before we make decisions, we want to focus on working with folks up front so that we actually can reach agreement on what needs to be done ahead of time before we make that decision. I mean, that's what we really want to focus on, so that there's actually less time spent after the decision's been made, but more time making a better decision, and that's where we want to just focus our time.
Chief, are you telling me you're willing to use either Ag Mediation Services or the National Appeals Division for all of these decisions? Are you willing to do that?
I'm just willing to use the mediation process for decisions that result in any reductions, either or temporary suspensions or changes to the number of livestock that they operate. But the other decisions that we make, I feel that our current appeals process is a better way to address those.
Well, and I'd like to follow up with you on this because the perception is that's an internal process, so it's not a fair hearing process. So I'd like to do some more work with you on that process. And then also, and I may have to save this for the next round, but talk to you a little bit about using range scientists for some of these determinations too, and I'll go into that on a follow-up round then. Just following up on using ag mediation services and the national appeals process in USDA, our mediation service people indicate that under the Forest Service rules, it doesn't allow you to go to ag mediation when you're negotiating long-term grazing agreements. Are you willing to look at your rules so that you can and will go to ag mediation when negotiating those long-term grazing?
Senator, I do believe that our process that we have in place, does work very well for if there's a disagreement with a decision. But especially with our grazing agreements, it's just essential that we're able to work together. And with the Grazing Association to be able to sit down with the Forest Service and we'd reach agreements about what needs to be in that agreement, and then to be able to move forward. Grazing agreements do not have any effect on the number of cattle that are run. It doesn't result in any reductions in livestock that are permitted out there. It's just more of basically an agreement about how we're going to work, the roles and responsibilities of the Grazing Association, the expectations, what the association can expect, from the agency. And so it's essential that we have those in place, especially with our grazing associations. But I do think the best approach on that is to be able to insist that people come together and they work out their differences before the agreement's put into place versus to have another process that, because I think that would just discourage people from working together on the front end of it if you have another process that you can go to. So that's where I feel that our current process works, and I would just want to continue to encourage our ranchers to be able to come together, and if it takes a little more time to sit down and work out those differences of opinion, that's the best place, that's the best time versus having anything, whether it's going through an appeal process or going through mediation. If you really want folks to be able to work together, I think they just need to take the time to work it out, and then we can reach agreement, and then we can move forward in a way that I think will be much more productive for everyone involved.
Well, I appreciate that, and no question that's what should be done on the front end, and then if they're not able to reach resolution, are you willing to go to either mediation services or to the appeals process that USDA has? That's my question to you.
Well, we'd have to change our regulations to do that.
Are you willing to look at doing that, or is that something that we would have to try to do legislatively then?
So, Senator, I'd like to work with you on this and maybe to gain a little more understanding. I have a lot of experience dealing with ranchers throughout my career. I worked in the northern region. I'm very familiar with the grazing agreements and the Grazing Association, but I would like, if you'd be willing to I could work with you to have a better understanding of this issue, and then we could maybe, based on that, be able to move forward.
I would very much appreciate that, including extending an invitation for you to come out to our state as well and visit with some of the ranchers and so forth. And that may be helpful too, but let's do that, including perhaps, would you be willing maybe to come out to the state and even discuss this issue with our ranchers?
I'd love the opportunity to get out to the field. That's why I started work in the Forest Service, and it seems it's pretty rare now that the days I ever get to go out. So I'd appreciate an invitation to come out.
Great, that'd be good, and I hereby extend that to you, and we'll work with you on that. And the other thing is, in going through this scientific process for rangeland management, the other thing I'd like to I guess, put out there for you to respond to is, at North Dakota State University, we have incredible rangeland. Talk about using those individuals in the process with your own experts. I think that brings credibility and help and maybe a a feeling of reaching out to our ranchers when you include our rangeland scientists? And obviously, I mean, they're experts. Your reaction to that?
I agree with you. That's an excellent approach. I mean, we do a lot of work with not only your universities, but also throughout the country, the universities and colleges. And I think that that is the best way to be able to bring people together, and so that we have the science there. From North Dakota, often there's additional benefits that if they're hearing it from people that are there in North Dakota, that often helps resolve some of these issues.
I appreciate that. And the other thing is working with NRCS. I think, given that this is ranch land, that this is the grasslands rather than a forest, both from the standpoint of our farmers and ranchers, as well as bridging with your own people, NRCS can be helpful as well. Your thoughts?
Yes. Just another example of where, the federal government needs to do a better job, to work together. And so like, your ranchers, whether it's the Forest Service or NRCS that they're visiting with or working with, whoever it is from the federal government should understand all the programs that are available, and so that we're working together, because especially up in your state, those ranching operations, they're not solely dependent on just the grasslands. It's also on their own private land. And so we got to be able to work that together so that it works for them, over time. And that means we got to have the flexibility, as if we have a fire that goes through either their private land or through the national forest, we got to be able to work together to have that flexibility so that they stay in business. One of the greatest benefits we have from our ranching community is the wildlife habitat, the open space that they provide, versus having their lands being converted to some form of development. So it's just essential that we work together to keep those folks on the landscape.
Appreciate that, Chief. Thank you.
Senator Murkowski, do you have additional questions? Senator Hoeven, did you have anything else you wanted to ask before we adjourn the hearing?
The only other thing I would just comment on, Chief, is I think the other helpful aspect of perhaps having you come out and having that dialogue is that I think ranchers, county commissioners, and others that live out in the grasslands can also come up with ideas that you may agree with that can help you save dollars too in these times of tight budgets. So I think that may be an added benefit of that whole discussion.